Hello and welcome to Might Be Awesome. My name is Sam Basher.
And I'm DJ Woldridge.
And here is our review of X-Men Dark Phoenix, the 12th installation of the X-Men franchise over at Fox. This film is directed and written by Simon Kinberg, normally producing the X-Men and Fantastic movies, but this movie also stars James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jessica Chastain, Evan Peters, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicolas Holt, Sophie Turner, Sheridan, Alexdanra Shipp, and so many more. Quickie synopsis.
Yes.
Jean Grey begins to develop incredible powers that corrupt and turn her into a Dark Phoenix. Ooh. Now the X-Men will have to decide if the life of a team member is worth more than all the people living in the world. Thank you, IMDb, for that gem.
We'll have to decide if our one teammate's worth all the people living on the planet right now.
We can't trade lives. We can't trade lives. She's just an adult. You know, it's we have to dive into that in X-Men Dark Phoenix. Now this movie's hitting theaters June 7th, 2019, and as of recording, that's going to be a Friday. And Rotten Tomato scores are not out yet, so we recorded these a little earlier. We got to see this last night, and shout out to Fox for inviting us out to a screening, and also AMC. Our screening was a little special because the fire alarm went off in the middle of it, and
you might be seeing a bunch of other reviews mention that as well.
Yeah, so we'll get that out of the way. It was very funny where there is a score, which by the way is done by Hans Zimmer. I thought it was a very good score. And during one of the fight scenes, you're like, yeah, this beat's really driving. It's really good. And then it gets to a quiet part, and you're like, weird choice. It's still going, and then the lights start going off in the theater. So, and it was only at the very end.
It's like classic, like climax. There's actually the place they're in has sirens going off, so I assumed that was what's happening.
Yeah,
and then like not a spoiler. A lot of psychic characters, and they go into like a psychic moment. And you're like, oh no, this is actually these are real alarms. We might actually want to be concerned about what's happening.
Overall, fine. Yeah. Everything was fine. Hey, don't worry, we made it out in one piece.
We're okay.
We're good to go.
Everybody was worried.
So with this movie, which was I believe delayed a little over a year from its initial release due to some changes they wanted to do to the third act of this film. We can kind of dive into that a little bit later. Also on our podcast, Only Stupid Answers, onlystupidanswers.com. But let's talk about our initial thoughts.
Yes, please.
DJ, tell the audience and myself what you're thinking going into this movie and when you're walking out of it trying to avoid the fires.
I think, I mean, I can't be the only one that was kind of thinking like, maybe this franchise should have had its swan song with Logan. That was such a nice, like, it was Hugh Jackman's last movie, it was Patrick Stewart's last movie. It kind of felt like it was a bit of a down note to go out on, but it felt like a solid way to like wrap things up. But going into it, I actually enjoyed it overall. You know, it was a little like, because with the behind the scenes drama, you don't know how much of that is with reshoots and everything, the stuff with like Disney and Fox. And then we found out recently that apparently the third act was very similar to another superhero movie, which they have not specified which one. People are assuming it's Captain Marvel, and having seen the movie, that seems like a safe bet.
A fair guess, yeah.
Yeah. And with all those reshoots and retooling and delays, I actually thought it was a pretty enjoyable movie, and it had a lot of moments that I enjoyed. And if you're a big fan of just seeing the X-Men use their powers together, you're in for a treat, because this actually had some of the coolest uses of the powers we've seen in the movies for a while.
Agreed. I actually had a pretty good time as well. X-Men Apocalypse really whiffed it, in my opinion, in terms of what I was expecting, because Days of Future Past was like, we were talking about this before, it's like somehow they reached a point where they could have two full casts of X-Men in one movie together, and it all cohesively works as a story.
Somebody made a joke when we were going in this one, like, this is X-Men's Endgame. It's like, actually, I think Days of Future Past was their Endgame, because it was insane.
It was huge. It was larger than life, and they really pulled it off in a great way. This movie, I agree that I liked it, but I had trouble trying to remember exactly what had happened in the movie by the end of it. I'll go.
It is inessential.
Yes. And it kind of feels like, at a certain point, you're like, if we got to keep going, I guess they could do this.
Yeah.
And I guess if these people were going against each other, it'd kind of go like this.
Yeah.
And I guess if aliens were in the mix, it'd kind of go like this.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like, because I know the X-Men have gone up against literally any threat you could possibly think of. We're talking multiple realities, other timelines, aliens, fish people, anything.
The whole shebang.
So I get that kind of logic to it. But at the same time, I had that feeling kind of going into it where it feels like they're kind of like limping to the finish line. Now, this movie is not that. It is not. It is an enjoyable film, and it was fun to watch in a theater because of a few things. We'll go into our specific positives, but for me, the score, which we found out was Hans Zimmer, which was a cool little treat. It had a very alien feel to it, and especially the use of bass was a nice way to highlight that since Jean has now taken on this alien entity, the Phoenix, that sometimes she gets distracted or overwhelmed by the power that's in her. So whenever that would happen, you get this big bass note, very similar to like Dark Knight Return or Dark Knight, and it made you feel kind of like that deafening type. It wasn't overpowering, but that deafening feeling you'd understand that she'd have as someone who was telepathic, being overrun by her own powers. And I thought that was interesting. And I will say the performances from basically everyone in this movie did a pretty good job. It's a bummer that the introduction for a lot of these younger people was X-Men Apocalypse, which was also trying to end a lot of the stories for like the older cast, or at least that's what we assumed. So I never really got to know any of these actors playing characters that we were excited to see, like Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, Nightcrawler, and when it came into this movie, they're pivotal. And so throughout, you're kind of like, I don't dislike you, and I don't think anyone's doing a bad job per se. I don't care really, and that's a bummer because I want to care because you guys are cool and your powers are cool. Yeah,
for me, the standouts were Sophie Turner, of course, because this movie hinges a lot. She plays Jean Grey. This movie hinges a lot on her and her performance. She is for once we get a centerpiece that's not Wolverine. And I thought Jennifer Lawrence did a good job as Mystique. A lot of people have already kind of discerned her role in this movie, if you will. But I thought she did a really good job. And of course, I mean, James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender as Professor X. Yeah, they're always great, but they do some interesting stuff with Professor X, challenge his character in a way that these movies have not before.
I will say that mentioning that this movie kind of just feels like extra, like a little. It feels like a bonus.
If you were to kind of imagine in your mind like the basic template of an X-Men movie, this is basically it. Like it's not really switching stuff up. It's just a pretty standard. And it's also interesting too because it feels like in the same year that we get Endgame, it feels kind of like a relic of superhero movies past, where they're like, hey, we can't be too crazy. All right, we got to ground things and make people can't be running around with costumes the whole movie, and we can't have everybody going up to space. And it's like, well, actually now we can. Like the audiences are primed for that stuff, so it's interesting to see a movie that like still plays as if it's the early 2000s, and you got to convince everybody to get on board with your superhero premise.
But it's weird because like Days of Future Past, not to just fully compare them, that movie goes full bonkers. You have two actors playing the same character in a room together talking to each other, which was one of the coolest scenes in an X-Men movie for me. So I fully agree. And kind of getting to a little bit of the negatives, one more positive. I think the cinematography is very they're clever. They go the extra mile a lot with capturing the powers, and especially more not somber scenes, but scenes that could just be very boilerplate. They actually try to get creative with it, and I appreciated that. But when it comes to, let's start with our enemy.
Jessica Chastain
is part of our main antagonist of this group of. I think it's fair to say aliens, because
extraterrestrial,
and to who they are and everything. You can watch the movie and you can figure out what their deal is.
I will say, no spoilers. Don't get too. There's been speculation about what they might be. It's pretty much the most boring of your options from the comics. It's the most boring one. So don't just tempering expectations. Don't think like, is it the Shi'ar? Just don't. No, don't put that in your brain.
They are from comics.
Yeah, they are from comics.
It is not what you're going to expect whatsoever. But
so put that aside, and then
I think Jessica Chastain does a good performance, but overall I think the script or the direction or whatever, they couldn't figure out how to make a very clear-cut villain, or instead of doing it like normal X-Men movies where sometimes the villain's a little bit more abstract. Apocalypse is not a good example, but other movies where it's like Magneto versus Professor X, it's there's not a very clear like mustache twirling bad guy, but in this film there is. And those are the kind of the roughest scenes for me, because they're just literally at points they're just describing evil things they want to do that are on face value, they are just evil, and that's what they're saying. And it's like, come on, gang. Like exactly like when you talk about early 2000s, like this is silly. This is you could find motivation here. You even see a little bit of the origin of why the aliens are here and what they're doing, and you're like, there's something here you could tap into of what it means, or maybe some similarities between them and the mutants. Like there could be something there, but it doesn't. It's very boilerplate. Like, one's good, one's bad.
They create so many conflicting. This movie really tries to put the X-Men themselves and the mutants themselves in conflicted positions, to the point where it almost feels like the villain is kind of perfunctory. because it's like the X-Men are having enough issues dealing with Jean, and Professor X is up to some stuff, and Magneto's always doing his own thing. Like I don't know if they needed the external force, but I think it was a desire to touch on stuff from the comics, because if you probably are aware, this is based off the classic Dark Phoenix saga. And
loosely.
So very loosely. There was somebody coming out of our theater that was not happy about
they were yelling into their phone.
Yeah, but I think at this point you kind of understand that they did that. So they were trying to touch on more of the space stuff, and I think this runs into a problem that a lot of X movies struggle with, but a lot of other movies that it's a lot. There's so many X-Men characters, and there's so much to that story that trying to tackle any story labeled saga in one movie is tough.
Yeah,
is just a really tough, and I thought they did a decent job creating their own story with those elements. But if you wanted like the bigger, more ambitious, like the Dark Phoenix saga is like an Infinity War level event. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going in expecting that, don't.
This feels very small. It feels very enclosed, even though this is probably the biggest threat that they faced overall. In terms of just scale, this should be the biggest. I will say the CGI is very impressive in this movie. They pull off a lot of stuff, especially with the news that the third act was basically created after the movie was done. There's some really cool action in the entirety of that, and just kind of going back to it for a second, the story overall of how they try to adapt it in terms of like scale, they try to make it more personal, especially with like when you mention like the villains. Sometimes they try to like just set the X-Men up against each other, which of course they do because superheroes. That feels like paper thin. That feels like this is a stretch. Like some people here are being dicks, but y'all are having meltdowns a little bit about this. Like, and sometimes people are just stupid. Like Jean gets nuked by this thing, and they're like, I guess she's good to go. Like,
she seems fine.
I mean, she's smiling and walking around, so
she's just absorbed a giant space entity, but she's probably okay.
She walks by with like one of those Ghostbusters scanners, like, you're good to go. It was like a magnetic wand. It's like, I think she's pretty good. Sometimes things just get a little silly, and but I think the performances overall, the CGI, the cinematography, and the music are the biggest highlights, especially the way they're able to capture the action. You bring up a good point, like with a Civil War, the way you see like certain power sets go up against each other, super fun. And in this, you get to see more friends fighting friends in ways that is very creative, but at the same time, it's weird how small it feels. And
it does feel small in some ways, in a very positive sense. More personal, and in some ways not as positive, because there's an opportunity to create a really big, interesting threat. So it's at least an interesting movie. It's not the worst. It's a better note to go out on than Apocalypse was, and I think it's a better use of these characters. And now that they're part of the MCU, I'm very interested to see where they go in the future. I think we're going to talk more about that in our next podcast episode on Only Stupid Answers,
which would be very exciting. And I think one last little thing I just wanted to point out is that they try to, with Jean's story, like you've mentioned, that there's so many characters, it's hard to focus on them, and Jean is the most central of this story because she has to be for what they're basing it off of. But at the same time, there's no clear direction of we get some things that we understand more of her backstory, but they try to like point out these like they try to like kind of insert these like progressive ideas into the script, but there's no basis for it earlier on in the movie. It's just at the very end. It's like, and it kind of feels like they're trying to empower Jean, which is cool, but it kind of feels like it came out on just left field at the last second. Someone like on set was like, hey, say this. And it was like, I wish there was more to that, because there's a really cool story about trauma that you could tell, especially trying to deal with it, especially if you start heightening it with superhero antics and threats. But it doesn't do that. And so it felt kind of like a disservice to her, even though Sophie Turner did such a good job with this role. But
real quick, before we wrap everything up, I wanted to ask you, our channel is called Might Be Awesome. We both enjoyed the movie overall, but we think there's potential for maybe even more greatness. Is there something for you that could have been changed that would have made this awesome, made this a slam dunk?
I think there's no one can really. A lot of people like to say like, oh, you should do like solo movies, but I think Guardians of the Galaxy is a good example for most people that team up movies can work, and you can get really good story arcs for a lot of characters.
Yeah.
I don't know. When it comes to making it awesome, I think they did the best that they could. I wish there was one more pass with like the script. Yeah. I think overall you could you were really close with a lot. I think all the pieces there, especially with like aliens, what that means for mutants and what that means for humans. There's something really cool of connecting all of that, and especially the idea of what the Phoenix represents in comics. It is a big old space bird that we all pray to, but it also it could have brought life to all of the universe. It can also destroy planets. It's like there's the idea of how volatile it is for good or evil. It doesn't matter. It just depends on how you use it. They even bring up the idea of that, but then they don't land it. And so it feels like if there was one more pass of the script of someone kind of just tightening up those, like the connectivity between what it means to be human, what it means to be a mutant, and what it means to be alien in the general sense and in the physical sense of what our threat is. I think this movie could have been like a standout for it, and a really nice entry for the X-Men franchise, because so many people want a good adaptation of the Dark Phoenix saga, and I think this is 100% better than Last Stand for whatever that was.
Easily,
100% better, but it's still not. It's still not like a slam dunk. It's not a home run. It's not another sports thing. It's
another sports metaphor. I think for me, I think it would have been cool if, maybe going along with this, if they'd emphasized a little bit more with the alien threat, and maybe make it the Shi'ar, because the Shi'ar, as they're represented in the comics, are very diverse and have a very diverse set of abilities themselves. And so seeing the X-Men, it's like the classic like Super Team A versus Super Team B, which is normally we get from X-Men versus Magneto's team. Seeing a more interesting alien threat, I think would have made it stand out more. And also I think if you're tackling something this big, you need to have that plan a couple movies deep to kind of like start laying the groundwork. So by the time you get to it, a lot of the heavy lifting's already done. Like the first half of this movie is just setting things up, you know what I mean? And it's just a lot. It's just a lot. But for me, I think that would have made it more awesome. Maybe plan it out a little bit more ahead of time and really go big. This would have cost you more money too, so this might not have ever been an option. But going more big with your alien threat.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But overall, I think if you want big action set pieces, this movie does deliver with that. And you get some cool display of powers and good score. If you wanted to, if you're looking for some good tunes, you can go ahead and check that out. But overall, let's go ahead, or summing it up. Let's go ahead and rate it.
Yes.
My score today I came up with is out of 12, because there are 12 X-Men films. That was hard for me to remember, because we have the 3.
Crazy to me, because it feels like there should be more. Because they've been since the early 2000s, you know what I mean? And with MCU, it's like 29, and it's like, this is just 12?
It's been here a long time, but they've been taking their time with it. So we've had the 3 original from the original trilogy. We have the 3 prequels. That's the First Class, Days of Future Past, Apocalypse.
And now this one, though.
And then this one. Oh, wait. And then 3 Logan. And then
2 Deadpool.
And then this one. So, 12.
12.
There you go.
Okay.
The number still work. There you go.
Out of 12.
I'll give my letter grade first. And then we were talking about this before. I think I'd give it a B-.
Yeah.
But it is... That feels, you explained it really well, where it was like, that feels a little too lofty, but going lower than that feels a little too
C+ feels like a real dig, and I'm like, no, I enjoyed it more than a C+. B-, like,
you're like, it's like an 80. You just got a B-. Like you're allowed to go hang out with friends tonight because you did okay with the test.
You know what? You did good enough.
You did good enough. So out of 12,
hey baby, B's get degrees, all right?
I think that's like a 8 out of 12.
I agree with that.
Like an 8.5 out of 12.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
It's very inoffensive. It feels very boilerplate, and if you just want a fun action movie, it's very much falls in the category of kind of forgettable blockbusters in a very positive way. Even though it doesn't sound that way. But any final thoughts?
Nope.
Yeah. Well, you know what, gang? You're gonna let us know in the comments down below what you thought. I know you're gonna have some thoughts going into this, especially with the Disney-Fox merger, whatever. But if you have seen the movie or you have some expectations you want to talk about down below, let's talk about that. Let's focus on that. But also make sure you like, subscribe, and go ahead and check out our Patreon, because we have a lot of fun content over there. A new show coming out very soon with a bunch of very cool creators that you're not going to want to miss. And of course, you can also check out our other deep dives and reviews here on the channel. We appreciate you guys, and we hope you enjoyed. Share with your friends, please. Love you. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.